Me, Trip, Jonathan, Nathan, Harshit, and Mark, and we're going to talk about some of the content from their talks, kind of continue those discussions. And I'm going to start off, and I'm going to ask Jonathan a question. Thank you, brother, for your talk. It was encouraging. One of my questions for you that I think is young pastors we're going to deal with a lot, and I think you have particular experience with, is in this kind of dark age, very secularized, where everything we think is seen as ridiculous, like Nathan was pointing out too. That means one thing for us as just individual Christians. We have our own fear of man, of being seen as foolish. As young pastors of churches, though, we also have worldly desires to see a ton of people show up in our buildings all the time. So one of my questions for you is if you have any counsel for us on fighting the kind of fear of man that would keep us from saying the things we need to, or even saying them as forcefully, and a desire to be palatable enough to get people in the door. How do you fight that person?
Maybe a bit of context for our church. I started at Q 3 years ago now. When I first preached there, one person came. And we've grown some since. I just think the gap between... There's just not many nominal Christians in Q. So I don't actually feel that compulsion to think, okay, if I twist this a little bit, then we get a load of people in. That nominalism has kind of died. So I'm naturally thinking if the church is going to grow, it's going to see hopefully the best growth, which is evangelism. So I'm having to go out and speak to people. Make sense?
Yeah. And so then as someone from the future then, where y'all are a little bit ahead of us, like you were saying, what counsel then do you have to us in the meantime, where there is more nominalism and we will be more tempted to trying to say the stuff that will get people into the door? Help us think about why that's not even helpful, and if you have any foresight that would help us to think about that.
Yeah, so I think listening to Harshit's talk is helpful. You just see where that nominalism, that kind of hope in some kind of Christendom leads. That is not helpful. That's not going to produce a healthy church. And long term, that's not going to help. I know you guys know that. But yeah, I think listening to something like Harshit's talk is helpful.
So Jonathan, when you heard Harshit's talk, did you think that the efforts you hear from America, I know there's some in England, but in America of desire to have an influence on culture, so Christians desire to influence culture, do you hear that as the same thing as what he means by the word Christianize?
Yeah, say again.
Well, we hear Abraham Kuyper quoted. He said, Christ says, "Of every square inch, this is mine," and we all love that. Is that really just the other end of what Harshit was warning us about? That's called Christianizing.
Yeah, I hear that Abraham Kuyper quote all the time, and I don't think it's particularly helpful. I think it needs to just be way more care with that.
Do you know, one of the guys that we were talking about earlier, you and I were talking about the guy proponent of Christianization. So his understanding of missions eventually took him into the direction of political engagement. So basically he and few other major Christian leaders went on to launch a Christian party for the interest of Christian people to have more influence on the nation.
As did Kuyper.
I mean, they're out already.
Yeah, I've heard people at seminary say, I think that Christendom is a good thing and that we should somehow reclaim that. I think that's a terrible thing. It starts with the gospel and lives being changed. And then there may be opportunities as Christians get into politics to see some social change.
And it doesn't sound like we're going to be doing much cultural changing in the end, as it is when we read the Bible.
Well, you got to ask how much cultural changing are the Christians in Egypt doing? Let alone the Christians in Saudi Arabia, or Iran. I'm not saying you can have no influence if you're small in number, but it's just, I think when we can only entertain that idea when we think of ourselves as being in the majority. The moment we become aware we're a minority, then it begins to be clear, we better have some other goals than shaping the culture.
And somebody's going to say, but you're such a pessimist, Mark. How would you answer that?
I don't think I'm a pessimist.
I agree.
How
would you respond?
What what do we see in Scripture about the future? So Mr. Worsley came to us from the future, but Jesus also has words for us about the future. And it seems like the future, according to Jesus, at least right before he comes back, is going to be pretty bad. So I remember talking to a famous preacher in New York City once about his millennial stance. And I said, so are you a post-millennialist? And he said, no. And then he paused for a minute and he said, I'm a kind of very optimistic amillennialist. And I said, well, yeah, I would love to be there. It's just I think Jesus is different than that. I don't think Jesus gives us that as an option. And I think that kind of optimism about culture can be really distracting. So I don't want it all turn all the members of my church into just full-time pastors. I'm really happy for, moms to be active in the home, or Proverbs 31 women, in real estate, or, folks who are lawyers or politicians or school teachers. But I do want them to understand the uniqueness of the Great Commission, the specialness of the gospel. Yeah.
The other thing to say on that as well is that there are 3-4 other churches in Kew, and they're very liberal, and we will never out-social action them. They're doing loads of stuff. We're never going to be able to do that. They don't preach the gospel at all. It's just all social action, it's all morality.
Now, because you use the word social action, Kingston, are you still here? Kingston, where are you? I can't see. You're up top? Oh, hello. You're right there. Were you here last night, Jonathan, for that when Kingston was asking about Ferguson, Missouri, and his church?
I think I might have stepped out for that.
Okay. Kingston was wondering, is his concerns about racial tensions in this city, part of St. Louis, is that something he needs to be concerned about, worried about, that he shouldn't get distracted into those kind of issues? Or is that a legitimate thing for him to pursue? To him, I think it's fair to say, Kingston, to you, it intuitively seems legitimate. Right. Yeah. So are we warning him, I don't know, just share the gospel with people?
No, I think it's legitimate. I think it's a legitimate concern. I think it depends partly on the size of your church and what you're able to do. So there's lots of good social action stuff that happens at Capitol Hill. We would love to do that long term. We have 17 members currently.
Right.
7-0? 1-7.
1-7. Okay.
17.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know all your members?
I do.
All of them, Brian. Where'd Brian go? Brian, all of them. Yeah. All right. Nathan, do you have any question for Harshit about what he said? Because I'm wondering how what he said affects what you do with your missions budget. Because you're a pretty aggressive, evangelistic, let's evangelize the world kind of guy. And you graduated from Southeastern Seminary, and you hear Harshit, do you think, well, this is just a hyper-Calvinistic, rainstorm? Forget it, don't do anything, God will save the elect, stop it right now with all your evangelism stuff? Because a number might be false that somebody reports, therefore we better not share the gospel?
Yeah, I wonder if, this, I think I feel the pull sometimes in the midst of this conversation, kind of the one that I asked you, Mark, when we hear things like what you talked about, Harshit. It can come off as pessimistic. Sort of elephant churches, slow, be careful, teach hermeneutics and theology and these kinds of things. Can you speak to the more optimistic sort of ideas that drive you to do what you do in India, and maybe then encourage these brothers in the ways in which they can think optimistically and not just pessimistically? Not that you only did pessimistically, but just try to help us think even more optimistically about how going slow in more elephant churches is actually aggressive and optimistic and good.
I think what people have to realize that actually faithful, healthy, biblical churches outlast everything else that people talk about. So everything else that people talk about is just there for a while. It seems it's there. So the kind of church...
Take a look at the room we're in.
Yeah, the kind of churches...
It's the old First Baptist Church.
The kind of churches that we are talking about and the kind of ministry that we are trying to encourage, it's actually very optimistic, positive, biblical. I don't want to be influenced by the people around me. They are actually quite pessimistic. They're thinking the world is going to crash tomorrow, just now, right now. So do everything you can do now. I mean, yes, it might. I don't know, it may. But I will do things the way the Bible tells me to do. I'm not going to mess with that thing. So I think this is what I would say.
Also, it's not just happening in places like India. So I don't want to throw a well-known mission organization under the bus. I'm not going to name them. But I remember speaking to one of the guys who's heading up stuff in London. And we got chatting, and we talked about family and so on. And then I asked him, I said, so what church are you going to?
Now, was this well-known mission organization British or American?
American.
Go ahead.
And I said, what church do you go to? And they said, well, I just prefer to think of them as missional communities. And he wasn't involved anywhere. He was just doing a series of Bible studies. And that's it. And that's frustrating because you think there are guys on the ground who are working really hard in places like London. And oh, how they would be helped if people like that could join those churches and do evangelism from that local church which is already established. But they don't want to do that.
Anybody on the front row, any of the speakers want to throw in anything, questions or comments further on what you've heard in any of these messages this morning, this conversation? Going once, going twice. Going to go to the group as general, right there in the back. Yep. And then who has microphones? Right here, one microphone here. Is there a second microphone or just one today? Okay, there's going to be a second one right over here, so just get one of their attention if you want to ask a question briefly. And friends, we've got about 10 minutes max. So the questions have to be to the point, and the answers need to be to the point. Yep, and you got to introduce yourself again first. All Congregationalist dude.
Yeah, Corey Klein, First Congregational Church of Allegan. My question is for Harshit. How do we as pastors find those reliable, faithful missionaries to support?
I think this is what I said, I think in my talk is start sending good men. If you send good men out there, then you would have good men to partner with. The problem with the church in America in the last 40, 50 years, they haven't sent good men. They were so interested in sending lots of men. And one of my mentors would often say, Harshit, one good man is better than 1,000 men. And I think that thing is beginning to just get into my head, yeah. Rather than having a crowd of 100 missionaries who don't know what they're doing, having one good man. So I think it's a long process, investing in people here now, preparing them for the future. So if you're a pastor, start investing in some few young men, and 10 years after, 15 years after, they will be in different parts of the world, and you'll be partnering with them. For the time being, maybe you might not be giving money to the rest of the world, and that's okay sometimes. It's okay. Just invest in guys here. I can put you in touch with a few good missionaries that I know. Don't put that.
Harshit, you would say this. What would you say about short-term mission work? I have a lot of people ask me that when I come to America. They say, oh, I would love to send out a short-term mission team to you.
And does that just mean the church in Nashville wants a vacation in London for their youth group? Okay, Harshit, just...
Here we lie.
Jonathan doesn't want to answer the hard question, so Harshit, you have to answer a hard question.
Do you know, most of them are not super helpful, unfortunately. I constantly keep getting a lot of requests. Can we bring teams over? And I'm constantly saying, let me think about it and I'll get back to you. One of the good...
And do you get back to them?
No.
I hear you're still thinking.
I think what has to happen is that churches back in America have to start thinking about this very clearly. And because people think, oh, I'm putting this much money, I have the right to go there with 15 people and do children's ministry and play football and run Sunday school or do different activities. But those 10, 15 days are an awful lot of work for hosting church, and people don't understand that. I'm really grateful for Capitol Hill, actually. So Andy will come out there for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, and just hang out with us. I don't have to create events for him. People from here will come. They'll just sit and talk to us what's happening with ministry. Just pray with us, study with us. And I think if people are content to do that, but American mentality is how much money I've put in, how much worth I'll get out. It's every bang for my buck. So if I'm going to fly there, I must do 20 different trainings. Sometimes it's useful, but most of the time it's not helpful. So I would say, again, for short-term mission, depending on who you are, most of the time it's wise for you just save that money, do something else.
And go read the book of Philippians. We just finished as a church. Look at the book of Philippians and see how the church at Philippi used a kind of short-term mission trip with Epaphroditus to come over, and see how Paul talks about that. I think you'll be instructed, be really encouraged. It's basically talking about what he just said.
So just to be more positive on that, we've had a couple come out from Capitol Hill, and they've joined us, and they found a job in the city, and they've become members of our church, and they evangelize in the local area, and they thought, well, this is our home for at least 2, 3, 4 years. And that has been gold.
Trip.
I was going to ask you, Harshit, just to follow up on what you said. Are you saying there are not enough good men who are already out there, so we shouldn't look to find them and support them? We should just raise up guys in hope? Or are you saying maybe the case is sometimes for people who are saying, yeah, I'd like to give right now, how do we find those? Are you saying there's not enough to find?
There are not enough good men out there. That's the fact. That's a fact of the matter. And that's a reflection of the church, the way church has been done for the last 50 years back here. That's why the people who were there are not good. And that's why the kind of work that was happening wasn't terribly solid. Having said that, the Lord is kind, there are a few good men out there, and I think you just have to do a lot of hard work of getting to know them and vetting them, identifying them. Just be patient, take more time.
And you still think the best way for us to do that is to reach out to 9 Marks, who can connect us with folks, who can tell us the folks whose relationships have already been built with.
Yeah, and do not respond to emails that you get through your website emails. So if people send you emails saying, hey, brother in the Lord, we are grateful for the work that you're doing, and I am doing this in India, and we'd like to have you come and teach, and you get super excited, wow, somebody in India is reaching out, something is wrong. There's a dead fish there. Just run from that email. Just don't respond to that.
There it is. Congregations dude, what's your name again? Corey? Corey. Another simple way where you don't even need to contact 9 Marks, just find another church that you like and trust and ask them who they're supporting. Just say, hey, would you mind showing me your missionary list? Could you just meet with me for an hour to talk to me about what's going on with each one of these folks? Would there be one of these that has some extra need that our church could get in and maybe help out with? Because among churches that trust each other, there could be loads of good missionary cooperation. Almost all the work we support, we're doing it with sister congregations. This one with these two, this one with this church, these 3 churches support this work. So it's just a great way to kind of network with churches. Yeah.
Gallagher, there we go. Marshall Gallagher, planning a church in Nashville. And to answer your question, yes, it is a vacation that these youth groups are taking most of the time, unfortunately. Anyway, so you mentioned, I think you kind of presented growing up in Atlanta, going to private Christian school, kind of being a contributing good member of society is just as in danger of condemnation as like the Muslim jihadists. So being from somewhere like the Bible Belt, I think that probably half of the kind of Christians in Nashville would react very negatively to that statement and say, oh, of course not, of course the good, person who, what's a wise way of challenging that kind of faithfully from the pulpit without really shoving those people out and kind of coming down on those people really hard just because it's been such a cultural kind of thought process?
Yeah, good question. I think first, it's always helpful to go to, obviously, the objective truths. Just show it to them in the Bible. And I think the place in which you can do that, kind of answer that question, is by showing them the holiness of God. Kind of what we talked about at the beginning, how they all said that she was a sinner. Highlight the holiness of God. And the moment that you begin to talk about the holiness of God, I think what should happen is the same thing that we see happening in Isaiah 6, when Isaiah sees the holiness of God and he's just struck at how he's a sinner. And this is a prophet, by the way. So that would be a good text maybe to preach, to help them see. I think the reason why they're acting negatively is because their standard is different than the standard of God. the holiness of God. And so if you hold up the beauty and the glory of God and the standard of God, they should be struck at how far short they fall of that, which is exactly what Paul's doing in Romans 7. And so the more that you can help them see that just week after week after week after week, that God is holy, He is big, He is great, and that our works, our good works, are just dirty rags to God, the more they're going to understand that. So just hold up the beauty of God. I think R.C. Sproul's book, Holiness of God, Mark mentioned that, is a really good book to kind of talk about that. But just hold up, just show them God in the standard of His holiness, and they should begin to see that. And if they don't...
Speakers, we've got one more question, and it's lunchtime. You need to come here immediately after this question so that we can take a picture, and then people can get to lunch. Last question, we've got 2 minutes.
All right, James, Living Water, Sardis, Ohio. I have a question for Harshit. I hope I'm saying that right. I understand the ideal of one really good man being better than 1,000 that aren't good. But if we're sending 1,000 that aren't good, then there must be something going on with the way we're training or the expectations we have on those 1,000 that at least isn't hitting India the way you'd like to see the people impacted in India. What recommendations would you make so we can improve the 1,000 we're sending and maybe have a more effective witness altogether with the people that are going?
Good question.
So how could you improve the effectiveness of these 1,000 men who are already there?
The 1,000 that we're training up, the 1,000 that we're training up now to come.
How can we do a better job training so that the 1,000 that turn up are better?
So I think it's the same, I'm saying the same thing over and over again. Back here, them being involved in local churches faithfully, them being elder-like men, vetted by the church elders, you having confidence in them that these guys are godly men who can handle scriptures faithfully, who can teach scripture well. Here, back here, if that's the kind, and how do you do that? Just the way you train elders back here, the way you train next generation leaders back here. Do the same thing. And of course, you'll have to teach them a little bit more like cross-cultural things and all those things that you need to teach a person, language skills and all those things that they need to know if they're going cross-cultural. But basically, you need to raise men here as if you're raising pastors for churches here. That's all I'm saying. If they can be good pastors here, then they will be effective pastor missionary there. Otherwise, we wouldn't have, we just have a lot of men there who are thinking what to do. They just keep coming up with things and just they keep doing things, keep trying, keep experimenting, and in the meantime, keep causing a lot of trouble for us.